Good morning, everyone. Welcome to a fairly unusual time slot for this. We're very appreciative to Tom Arthur, Minister for Public Finance, Planning and Community Wealth, for making time to come to talk to us. I'll hand over to Karen in a moment. My colleague Karen Hamilton, who'll be leading the discussion. Inevitably, be quite a focus on National Planning Framework 4. And I'm not sure whether to thank the Minister or not, because I'm now at the stage where I can no longer put off delaying working on the new edition of my planning book. It was a useful excuse to say, well, there's not much point trying to finish it off. I'm now going to have to finish it off. So as I say, I'm not sure if that's the thank you or not. Seriously, I think we're all appreciating that we're moving now to a period where there's a degree of certainty rather than referring to drafts and not being sure what is happening. Thank you again to the Minister for making the time to be available to talk to us today. Karen, if I can pass over to you for the discussion.
Hey, thanks, Neil, and well done for getting a plug for your book in so quickly on the webinar. So morning, Minister, and it's great to have you joining us again on Planning Live. And as Neil is saying, a lot has happened and you've been incredibly busy, I think, since the last time that we had you here. So on that note, really sort of straight into the questions on NPF 4. So I'm sure, as everyone listening is aware, NPF 4 was approved by the Scottish Parliament last week, but it would be really helpful if you could maybe take us through what are the final steps to be taken in the process, and what is the anticipated timeline for Minister's approval.
Good morning, Karen. Thank you very much to everyone for the invitation to be here. And I just at the outset want to put on record my appreciation to everyone who has contributed towards NPF 4. I appreciate that the many people on the call who will have contributed via evidence or informing submissions that went either to our public consultation, one of our rounds of public consultation over the last 3 years, or indeed the committee inquiry in Parliament as well. It's the collective work of people operating right across planning in Scotland that has helped us get to this stage of NPF 4 and to get to a position where we're able to receive such positive feedback on the improvements that were made between draft and revised draft. So I do want to just take this opportunity to express my sincere gratitude to everyone for their contribution, and also to say I'm very much looking forward to building upon that spirit of collaboration going forward as we come to the business of delivering NPF 4, because fundamentally that is what it's all about. There's no point passing a new planning framework simply for it to lie and gather dust on the shelf. And to that effect, we're not wasting any time in progressing the implementation. There was a letter published jointly by the Chief Planner, Fiona Simpson, and myself yesterday, setting out some initial steps. We'll be publishing transitional guidance relatively soon. And I can confirm myself in the letter that we will be introducing laying the relevant regulations to give effect to the NPF status as part of the statutory development plan ahead of ministers formally publishing and adopting NPF 4 at 9 a.m. on Monday, the 13th of February. So I've been asked many times before, when will we see NPF in its various forms? And I'm very delighted that I can now say to you very precisely when it will become part of the statutory development plan.
So that's a very precise indeed. So a date for everyone's calendar. And so you mentioned the regs, which will be coming in due course on the new LDP system, and you mentioned the transitional guidance. I'll maybe just come back to that in a moment, but or perhaps just remind everybody, of course, that at the adoption the adoption of NPF 4 formally, of course, at that point SPP goes, the old NPF 3 goes, and the strategic development plans will be going as well. So there's a lot that comes with all of that when we get to that point of 13th Feb. And for anyone that is just wanting to recap on that detail, the letter which the Minister mentioned is of course available on Scottish Government website. So Minister, if I can perhaps just come back to the transitional guidance for a moment, and so you mentioned that would be being published shortly and before adoption, and that's really aimed at trying to smooth the path between where we are at the moment in terms of the system and the new system with NPF 4 forming part of the development plan. Is there anything that you can say to us at this stage about sort of likely content? And I suppose I'm thinking in particular about concern that's been expressed about applications that are in the system at the moment. They may have been prepared many months ago in a situation where they thought they were hitting all the right buttons, in terms of a current LDP, but may now be found wanting in terms of NPF4 policies. Might we expect a sort of pragmatic solution to how that would be dealt with going forward?
Well, I think we would always recognise it when there are these transitions. It's inevitable that there will be some applications that are going through the system and they have to be considered carefully. And that's just part of the course with the process that we have. Ahead of the adoption of NPF4, as we said in the letter published yesterday, obviously recognising this for the individual decision maker. However, given that Parliament has approved NPF4 and that the final step is adoption, we would expect a significant material weight would be given to NPF4 in its current status. With regards to transitional guidance, I'll have a bit more to say shortly, but when we publish it, but we'll be looking to sort of provide some more detail about the new status of NPF4, how that relates to the status of the LDPs as jointly part of the development plan. And it's also going to contain some more specific support assistance in particular areas. So, for example, some of the areas that were raised at the tail end of the parliamentary process included around housing and drive-throughs. And as I've committed to do so on the record in Parliament, I and my officials will be engaging with relevant stakeholders to ensure that there's clarity. So that's some of the initial steps that we'll be taking in publishing the transitional guidance. And then beyond that period, we will be moving on to publish the regulations for the new style and guidance for the new style LDPs as well.
Sure, and maybe we'll come back to that just shortly. I think that transitional guidance, certainly people are going to be very interested in that, and I'm sure it's going to be very welcome. You mentioned housing in particular. I don't know, there's been a lot of discussions ongoing, for example, in the Glasgow area on issues like affordable housing and how that's going to play through. But as you've said, moving into a new phase of work now, and wanting to be very positive about that. But I suppose if I can ask the question, what do you see as the biggest challenge going forward in terms of implementation as we move into that new phase?
Well, I think fundamentally we're not just having an update of policy. This is quite fundamental. I'd suggested that in the debate that this perhaps constitutes one of, if not the biggest changes to the planning system in probably 75 years since it was implemented. I'll be interested to see when he publishes his book whether that's something he agrees with or not. But that in itself is significant, and I think as well to be in a position where we have climate and nature front and centre is such a significant change. We have maybe become accustomed now to the context of eliminating climate and emergency following declarations and the significant escalation of climate and biodiversity up the global political agenda in recent years. But I think if we can cast our minds back 10 or 15 years, to think that we would be in a position where these priorities would be front and centre in our national planning framework, and that the national planning framework is no longer is going to have the enhanced status it does, that would have been recognised as really quite a significant change. I think we have grown familiar with NPF4, with the long process of the Planning Act 2019 and the process of developing NPF4 with the various rounds of consultation. there is perhaps a familiarity, and we become accustomed to what the intent is. But that clear intent around addressing climate change, tackling that biodiversity crisis, they are absolutely central. I think that in itself is going to be the biggest change that we are collectively pursuing. So in terms of you asked, I think the term you used was challenge. I'd be less inclined to use the word challenge, because I think we recognise that having to make this change and embrace this change is an imperative. It's an economic imperative, given how significant this agenda is going to be to future prosperity. But there's a moral imperative as well, in terms of the world that we pass on to the next generation. So that in itself it could be characterised as a challenge, but it's something that is necessary, and it's also a huge opportunity. And we recognise that right across a wider policy agenda around net zero and opportunities that are there. But NPF4 itself is a huge opportunity to advance that agenda, and it's also, I hope, an opportunity, given, as I touched on earlier, the significant collaboration and work that has went in from so many people to get NPF4 to where it is today, is an opportunity to really recast planning in a much more positive light, particularly amongst the wider public, and understanding what planning is about and what planning can do and how central it is to so much of what we want to achieve. So I don't want to do that rather sort of cliche thing of trying to just, reframe a challenge as an opportunity. But I think, notwithstanding the significance and scale of this, it's something we can build upon the success of developing NPF4 and carry that into implementation. I think we've got the potential to do something really quite significant and marked that will make a significant improvement upon the prosperity and well-being of future generations.
It's a great way of looking at it, and it's. I think we all want to see that coming through in the decision making. And you mentioned it being, the biggest change in 75 years, and very much focusing on. If we think about policy one and the emphasis on the climate change and nature crises. Do you think there's perhaps a job of education to be done there in terms of elected members at the local level, in making sure that understanding has landed fully with decision makers?
I think on that specific point, there will be varying levels of awareness and understanding of the relevant issues, as we would always expect. But on the broader point, to be aware one of the outstanding provisions in the 2019 Planning Act is managed training for elected members in local authorities. So that is something that is part of our planning reform programme we will be taking forward. So we've been engaging with the stakeholders about what that would look like. Clearly, there will be certain aspects of planning knowledge that are required for every locality. There will be other areas that will require more specific and specialist knowledge, depending, for example, planning, etc. So that process of work is going to be ongoing anyway, fulfilling those obligations under the Planning Act. But I think as well, there's collectively a need for us all to continue to update our understanding about what it is we need to do to make sure we're working collectively towards net zero in 2045. And planning is going to be absolutely central to that. And I think to some extent it is firmly established itself on the policy agenda, I think, of all political parties. And we now, through the forthcoming adoption of NPF4, have a statutory development plan which puts climate and nature front and centre.
And certainly been very well received, I think, by the renewables industry, for example, and there's that recognition of government having listened to the comments that were given. But I suppose sticking with the delivery and implementation theme, Minister, and I hate to mention the R word of resourcing, but so obviously it's a constant topic, and I think resourcing of the system has been identified by some of the stakeholders as one of the biggest threats to the delivery. Our TPI is called for a comprehensive skills and resource strategy. So we had fees increase last year, but what can Scottish Government do, and what is the plan to help address that and ensure that both planning authorities and I suppose the DPA as well as another major player in the system can be appropriately staffed and funded for the task that lies ahead?
That was, of course, a key issue that emerged from parliamentary scrutiny as well as the broader public consultation and engagement that we've had. When I gave my statement to Parliament in November 2021 for the publication of the draft NPF4, as it then was, I responded to questions and making very clear that I recognise the need to ensure that we have a planning system that is resourced, both in terms of cash and in terms of the number of planners we have to deliver NPF4. Touched on the remarks earlier, this document to realise its potential fundamentally has to be delivered, and that requires a planning system that is fully resourced. Now, we touched on the issue of fees. That is something that was implemented early last year. There was a commitment given to taking that forward. We are working coordination with the high-level group on the issue of full cost recovery. Now, that is clearly an area that there's a range of views on, and also just about the impacts that it would actually be in deliverability. But I gave the undertaking that I would engage closely and work with partners to explore that area, and that is what we're doing. And that sits within a broader range of work that the Scottish Government's doing around a partnership agreement with local government and indeed fiscal framework. We have supported through the high-level group RTPI improvement service, for example, in delivering future planners reports. So we're looking at how we can attract more people within the profession. But I also have to, as ambitious as I am, as our government, to ensure that the planning system is fully resourced, we have to temper it with a degree of realism that these issues are long-standing. There's going to be no quick fix or overnight remedy. The challenges around recruitment and retention within the planning profession are not unique to that particular profession. But see all sorts of challenges around recruitment and retention right across the public and private sector. And indeed, with planning as well, it's not just in Scotland, across the UK and indeed internationally, there are challenges there. So when we take practical steps around seeking to increase resource through fees, looking how we can work towards full cost recovery, the future planner project, working with planners, working with the bodies to encourage more people into the profession, I think there's also an opportunity for the adoption of NPF4, the enhanced status that will give, and adopted as part of the statutory development plan. And the sheer level of ambition that we have with NPF4 is aligned with a much broader policy agenda with regards to net zero 2045. That can act as a hopefully an inspiration and a motivation for more people to come into the planning profession, and for young people to consider what particular career they want to produce, to recognise that actually planning is a really exciting, dynamic career where they can have a key role in shaping not just the future of their local communities, but the country as a whole.
It's absolutely the time to be capitalising on all of that, and certainly I think we're all aware of the sort of morale issues, and perhaps particularly with public sector planners at the moment. But and we've spoken before with the RTPI on Planning Live about the Future Planners project. So hopefully we'll see that bearing fruit over the longer term. So. On monitoring then of NPF4 and the results that you're looking to see, obviously that will be a key part of successful implementation. And I think you outlined a timetable for review in your speech to Parliament last week, that there would be initial 6 month and then annual review thereafter. Can you say what would be your priorities that you'd be looking for coming through in those sort of early phases of the review, and what, I suppose, what are the levers at your disposal if you're not seeing what you're looking for in those reviews?
It's a good question. The plan will be with the delivery programme, as you said, indicated, will be a review after 6 months, thereafter yearly. do have a new planning and construction in place advisory group, which will be establishing soon, which will have a key role to play as part of that monitoring process. There will also be continued and strong engagement from the Parliament as well. I know this is something that the Local Government Housing and Planning Committee has expressed an interest in. So one of the things that I'll be looking for in that process of monitoring is to continue that spirit of collaboration and information sharing. I also recognise that we have an opportunity after 6 months to act upon some initial reflections on some issues that have emerged out of the last phase of parliamentary scrutiny. The reality is that planning to identify the impact the NPF4 is having will take some time to feed through in particular areas. Now, clearly, for particular issues that emerge with specific policies, that can be the sort of thing that could potentially be addressed through further guidance or refinement of existing guidance. We will be commencing provisions, however, within the Planning Act later this year, which will enable the amendment of NPF4, should that be required. Now, clearly, one of the strong selling points of having a 10-year statutory planning framework is the certainty it provides. But these things can't exist now, but they have to be ultimately live within a context where we may have to respond to circumstances that we do not yet foresee or we can't anticipate, or as a result of not being able to fully appreciate what the impact or consequences of a particular policy would be. But any move, I think, further down the line to amend any aspect of NPF4 would be one the decision would have to be taken very carefully and fully informed by evidence and consultation and engagement. So I don't want to be talking about amending NPF4, but we're still got a few weeks before we formally adopt it. But I think it's important to recognise that just as the world's not going to stand still over the next 10 years, we can't expect our planning system to do it. I think we have a solid foundation with NPF4, and of course the local development plans will have such an important role to play as that other half of the statutory development plan. But we do have that flexibility there within the review of the delivery programme after 6 months, the annual review, the working transition guidance, the ongoing collaboration, and if need be, the means of amending NPF4 subject to the appropriate procedures to respond to any issues that emerge either in the short term or long term.
I think that's it's encouraging to you that there are a number of options that you have, and as you say, it's also going to be a process of sort of gathering information and data as to how things are going, and as you've mentioned, obviously the continuing committee involvement, which I'm sure will be valuable to you in getting their feedback. So I wonder if we could pick up with you now on a specific issue or an issue for a specific sector, Minister. If we think about the house building industry, and you'll be aware they've had fairly consistently raised concerns through the NPF4 process about what they saw as a lack of ambition in the housing numbers, and had expressed the view that the new policy perhaps didn't express or didn't reflect the housing crisis, which sits alongside the climate change crisis. Now, we are where we are now, obviously, on the policy itself, but what will Scottish Government do going forward to ensure that those concerns aren't realised and that housing delivery is going to be driven forward with the urgency that's required?
Firstly, I'm very grateful for all of the input of the housing sector, local Scotland's industry body, and the whole process of developing NPF4 and for their valuable insights. I recognise the concerns that the housing sector raises, because more broadly it is a very challenging set of circumstances within the prevailing economic conditions that we face. So it's the point that I would want to stress is it's important to recognise that board planning has a very significant role to play. It is by no means the sole determinant of how of performance and delivery within the housing sector. I think there is a recognition ahead of the NPF4 that much of the debate around housing have become perhaps focused more on numbers and become quite contentious, it certainly would be an issue that could generate much political controversy at a local level. And what we're sort of achieving with NPF4 is to really refocus back into having a plan-led system. And within the introduction of the minimum operating housing land requirement, we now have set minimums which have been achieved through engagement with planning authorities that establish a minimum, not a ceiling, but a floor upon which local development plans can then build. And local development plans will have a significant role to play because a local housing land requirement will form part of the considerations at the evidence gathering stage. So we have a strong basis in which to go forward. But as I said at the committee, when I gave evidence last autumn on the revised draft of NPF4, I'm committed to the closest continuing engagement. I touched on the issue of transition guidance earlier, and how we look at using addressing specific points for each federal housing sector. My officials will be engaging regularly with representatives of the housing sector to ensure we will fully understand their concerns. I recognise in particular around the wonder methodology that has been a number of points raised by stakeholders. I know this is something the committee in Parliament is keen to explore, and likewise, my officials now are engaging in that process as well. So with housing, this is as I say, fundamentally getting into it, get the approach where we have a plan-led system and recognising that the quality of home doesn't end at the front door to move beyond debates around numbers and focusing on delivery. By recognising no one body, no institution has a monopoly of wisdom, which is why I want to build in that spirit of engagement and collaboration that characterised the development of NPF4 and take that into the actual process of delivery.
You mentioned the sort of controversy, well, over recent years, number of appeals and court cases focusing in on the numbers and the methodology, and Homes for Scotland are taking forward their own piece of work looking at the Honda methodology, and I think, Minister, you committed recently to working with Homes for Scotland on that. So might that lead to ultimately to a piece of Scottish Government guidance reflecting that work, depending where it gets to, or perhaps a document that is government endorsed at the end of the day?
I don't want to prejudge the outcome of what engagement would be, but I'm going in there with an open mind and the genuine willingness to engage and understand more fully what the particular issues are. As there can always be with many matter of policy, no more so within planning, there can be, you can sometimes find that we can arrive at very different points of view and perspective, and there could be a need to disagree, just reflecting different views. But equally as well, I think there's an opportunity, as I said earlier, building that process that we had through developing NPF4, the fact that we took that extra time, we listened to the stakeholders were saying it would take more time to get this right. We've taken the extra 6 months responding. So the approach I'm taking into this is not to prejudge what the outcome will be, but to actually recognise where our shared interest is, which is that we want to go and deliver great places for people to live, and that recognition as well, I think, is shared, that quality home doesn't end at the front door. And I'm very much looking forward to having that engagement discussion going forward. And as I say, while I do want to prejudge what the outcome would be, Sarah earlier demonstrated my willingness where we can have a narrow side approach, considered engagement. Should that lead to a case for change, then that's something I'm willing to take forward.
I think I'm sure the industry is delighted to hear all of that. And it's, as you say, sort of building on continuing those channels of communication that have been ongoing over the period of this whole piece of work. So if we can maybe turn our attention now to the new sort of breed of LDPs that will be coming forward now, and I think you've recognised that obviously with many many of the planning authorities holding off until the point where NPF4 was adopted before starting the serious work on bringing forward their new plans. Many of the authorities will just be moving into that phase now. It'll be a challenging time for them, I think, taking that work forward, and doubtless will have numerous issues sort of thrown up concerning the interpretation of NPF4 as is natural. I think the Scottish Government have recognised that there may be some scope for LDPs to diverge from particular policies in NPF4 to reflect local circumstances, perhaps, maybe in rural areas where particular issues may come into play. But where that happens, well, planning authorities need to be setting out a robust justification for a departure from NPF4, and might we expect those sorts of matters of compliance to be looked at by reporters at LDP examinations?
Well, we're in the process of finalising the regulations and guidance that will allow for the work to commence or the new style LDPs in earnest. And that will have, yes, thematic guidance and policies, but also on process of LDP development. But I think underpinning it in part of the key motives are drivers of how the intent of PBSA with regards to performance planning systems. By having that suite of that kind of policies, it does provide consistency. And it also means that in preparing LDPs, there is not the same need to go replicate and duplicate policy, and it can be much more focused as a place-based spatial strategy. But I do recognise that we have to have flexibility, and policies will have require perhaps even nuance to different circumstances, and that is right on top of that. It's when you have the process still looking to plans. But I think where there is going to be divergence, then it is something that I'd expect would have to be justified and properly debated and considered by the relevant authority, because fundamentally many of the issues that published through the policy handbook, they are appropriate to be all over Scotland. We wouldn't want situations where we lose that perhaps consistency of approach or consistency of policy intent. I recognise that we realise intent can vary in different localities, but making sure we don't lose that consistency of intent by having 34 different varieties of each policy, which would initiate undermine, the impact the NPF4 can have. But what I wanted to touch on is that how do you continue to engage with all stakeholders going forward, and part of the monitoring process, of course, is going to be to how NPF4 is in the principle underpinning it translated into the spatial strategies of local development plans, and the regional spatial strategies that emerge from different planning authorities as well will be another area that will reflect how different localities and communities respond. But as I say, I'm keen to engage, and also just as a final point, touching on that delivery and implementation will be a pivot for government for the planning architecture regeneration division. We have understandably had a focus on legislation and then development of NPF4. We now really pivot much more into a delivery mode, and that's going to be through working in partnership and having close engagement with all stakeholders. And I look forward to seeing how respective planning authorities respond to NPF4 and develop their new style to go forward.
As you say, it's that sort of classic planning balance. There'll be that need for flexibility, but with everyone being conscious of not undermining the new set of policies that we have, that are going to be critical for Scotland going forward. But undoubtedly, I think a sort of steep learning curve for the first few authorities that are going through those new processes. So I'm sure everyone will be monitoring all of that very, very closely. So I suppose, Minister, discussion's been taking up largely with NPF4 today, but what else should we be looking forward to on the planning front in the coming years? Is there anything else that's on your agenda at the moment for the Directorate that you'd like to mention this morning for us to look out for?
I'm conscious there's only 9 minutes remaining of this meeting, but yes, there's a huge amount of work taking forward. Clearly, a lot of it will be related to supporting multi-play and delivering an NPF4, touching the regulations for these space strategies, the place efficiency assessments, which are going to be significant priorities. We have included the second phase of our PD rights review, and we will be bringing forward regulations shortly on that. We will be taking forward the third phase of the PD rights review, most likely in the spring, and that have a particular focus on renewable energy, which has been considerable interest from in Parliament. There's a number of aspects, of course, of the planning bill that will be commenced. Many of them I'm quite excited about moving forward as we go later in the year and beyond to work in the master plan consent areas, which I think is a very powerful tool for delivery. And I think the more I discuss master plan consent areas with colleagues in Parliament, the more excited we are to potentially in delivery, because the ongoing work in our digital planning agenda as well, which is going to be important. And then, of course, there's the ongoing work on resourcing and performance, and progressing bond positions and dialogue we have across recovery as well as to do both action coordinator. So yes, there's a huge amount taking place in that space, and also I was conscious when I had particular interest and particularly some clarification in drafting published around community work and political responsibilities with our programs of government with all of the consultation of legislation on community work building. So that was something that we could take forward this year, which will enhance and further develop and public understanding engagement with the building issue, which I know will be able to experience students also. So yes, lots and lots to get on with.
Absolutely, it's exhausting just listening to that list. Can I perhaps ask you just one particular question on that front? Infrastructure levy is sort of back in the press again for proposals that are coming forward down south. Obviously, we have our own provisions within the Planning Act to enable a mechanism to come forward in Scotland. Has Scottish Government sort of developed its thinking further on that particular front as to when and if, I suppose, we're still heading down that track?
It's something we expect we've always had this particular focus on the work that I said in the previous question is going to constitute a priority going forward, short to medium term, but further consideration we get into already in due course.
Okay, no, that's fair enough. Or maybe just a question to sort of close off from me, and then maybe Neil's got a couple of questions just from the listeners. But I was going to ask you, Minister, when you joined us last on Planning Live, September 21, which no doubt seems a long time ago now, but you were reflecting at that point on your first sort of 100 days in post. So a lot of water under the bridge since then. But as you were saying, you've presided over some of the most significant changes to the system in many, many years. What would you say you've learned from that experience, sort of baptism of fire? And what might you say you're most proud of in all of that?
In terms of learning, for me, it's confirmed that old maxim that which is, please excuse the phone ringing, but it's confirmed that old maxim that which is done well is done quickly enough. We took our time, effectively, so we were in a position where we've already had a significant amount of consultation and engagement application to draft, but there was that asked by committee and stakeholders to take more time, and we did so. And I think the benefits that were reflected in the commentary that we received, commentary in the comments that taken in that have been public, but also what people have said privately expressing their views, regardless of where they may what particular view they need to take a policy issue. The process and ensuring that the one that allowed maximum opportunity for engagement has been crucial, and it's certainly something that will inform how I go forward to work to do and deliver NPF4, but ultimately planning and realising the vision of NPF4 is going to require input and collaboration from everyone. And what I'm, I suppose, proud of is a way that so many people have been able to come together and work constructively to take a document that was bold in vision, but it was recognised in the shortcomings of its perhaps presentation, accessibility, consistency, and work constructively to engage and to put forward ideas of how it's been improved. And in fact, through that process, we now have a document that is far better for that process. And I think it's testament to the value of that public engagement, and it's testament to the vigour of our sort of parliamentary process that these views were aired. The government was able to, as a consequence of that scrutiny and engagement, and deliver something that was a stronger document that provides a solid foundation for going forward. So I think that's is a key learning for me. It's the value of engagement, of listening, and though sometimes it's not always possible to take as much time as we would like, and we do have that opportunity to do so, and to recognise it. Whatever time we were lost or taking a wee bit longer, the value of the game that arises from that is far greater.
Well, that's, I think, probably a very positive note to finish on. But let's hope that that method of working can continue positively into the next phase. So, Neil, I'm afraid I've left you with about 2 minutes before that hard deadline. So I don't know if you can squeeze in another question, or if it might just be time for wrap up and follow up questions by mail, as it were.
There was one question which is very straightforward. So I'll ask that, and as you say, carry over the other ones and possibly get a response by email. The question was, can you give us any indication when the transitional guidance will actually be published?
I can't give an exact date yet, but I recognise the strong interest in this. As I made reference to earlier, I have given undertakings that have engaged with relevant stakeholders on some particular issues that were raised. And I want to show that process is being completed ahead of publishing it, but it is something we need to be able to do very soon. And I will, as I say, endeavour perhaps to follow up in correspondence as soon as I can to provide a more precise time frame.
Thank you for that. So just to wrap up, and Minister, I appreciate you've got something to go to. So if you literally want to leave, don't feel you have to wait for my wrap up. And our thanks to you. That was very informative and very useful. And thank you to Karen as well. What I forgot to remind everyone was this session has been recorded. The recording will be made available probably early next week. So that's a chance for you to listen again, or indeed send a link to any colleagues or friends that you feel may be interested. In terms of our next session, there's the details up on the screen there. We'll be reverting back to our normal Thursday slot. So that'll be Thursday next week. Slightly depressing that we're already close to the end of January. We're continuing on the MPF theme. Obviously, the discussion today has shown how there's so much interest and so many things to talk about. So we'll be using that as an opportunity for myself, Karen, and Elaine Farquharson Black to have a chat amongst ourselves share our thoughts and insights, and possibly posing thoughts about challenges or opportunities, to use some of the language that we touched on today. So if you've not already booked, you can book via our website for that. If there's anything in particular that you would like us to talk about, do drop us an email in advance, and we can build that into the discussion. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in today. It's been great to see so many people, and as well that so many people have stuck all the way through. Hopefully, you'll all come back for more, as it were, a week on Thursday. In the meantime, hope you have a good rest of the day, and look forward to seeing you all soon. Thanks very much.
Thanks.